Alright, it's July 2024, and it's approximately 1.5 years ago since me and Sissel went to Cuba. Since the summer here in Denmark is practically non-existing, we might as well get started on the editing. So let's see where it takes us. We started the journey by taking the train from Aarhus to Copenhagen. There we quickly learned that the plane was super delayed. Apparently there was some technical difficulties. That meant that we missed our connection flight to Havana later that evening, and we actually had to spend 2 days in Toronto. For the first night we were put in an airport hotel, but on the second night we ditched that and went downtown and found a nice hotel where we could probably celebrate New Year. In the evening I was down by the harbor to catch the fireworks together with other locals. On January 1st, we went up to the CN Tower to catch a glimpse across Toronto and just went around exploring the city and relaxing.
Det er flot.
Man kan mærke, at tårnet bevæger sig.
In the evening we managed to catch the flight down to Havana, and it was quite the contrast that met us. Luckily we didn't get a stamp in the passport, because that can hurt our passports in the future, so luckily it was just a piece of paper. Also we had to bring lots of cash, because we also heard that the ATMs are not necessarily full. The usual thing is to stay in casa particulares. I think the main reason for that is that there's not so many hotels in Havana, and actually it's a quite nice experience. So these families, they rent out the extra rooms to have a secondary income. For the first day in Havana, we initially went to get a SIM card. We had to wait in line for 1.5 hours just to get into the store, and after that we were good to go. Later that day we also went on a walking tour just to get a brief understanding of Cuba and Havana as a capital.
Llego a Cuarto, voy para Mayarí. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané. Llego a Cuarto, voy para Mayarí. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané. Llego a Cuarto, voy para Mayarí.
For the second day, we decided to do something maybe a bit touristy. That was to flag down one of those vintage classic American cars to take a ride through the city and then dropping us off at the Jose Martin Memorial.
Cariño que te tengo, no te lo puedo negar. Se me sale la babita, yo no lo puedo evitar.
From there, we took a stroll through the city and basically just had a walk through the western part of Havana, whereas the walking tour the day before mainly was concentrated around the eastern part of Havana, the more sort of tourist area.
Limpia el camino de paz, que yo me quiero sentar en aquel tronco que veo y así no puedo llegar.
And of course, with every meal comes a cocktail. So either we got mojitos or pina coladas for almost every meal. But I've also never tasted pina coladas and mojitos anywhere else like this. After spending some amazing days in Havana, it was finally time to continue to Vinales. I think Vinales is located like 3 to 4 hours drive away from Havana. Again, we stayed in a casa particular and even had our own small house. The owner was super polite, really helpful, really kind, offered us juices when we came, and generally they just seemed to care a lot about the guests. For sunset, we decided to walk up the nearest hill and had an amazing view over the town. For dinner, our host had actually prepared a meal on top of his roof, which was an amazing experience and so tasty. On the second day in Vinales, we had a biking tour through the area. And it was actually the owner's son of our Casa Particular that was the guide of the tour.
The leaf with the less flavor, so binder made double function on cigar.
We were biking through this amazing scenery, and we also stopped at a cigar plantation. It was really interesting to see how they grow the leaves and how they actually turn it into tobacco and cigars eventually. And it was my first time trying smoking, but I figured I had to do it there if I had to try it.
De Alto Cedro voy para Matané, llego a Cuarto voy para Mayarí. De Alto Cedro voy para Matané, llego a Cuarto voy para Mayarí.
In the afternoon, after our bike ride, I decided I needed a haircut. Generally, I do have a rule that is always get a haircut when traveling. Sometimes though, there is a language barrier, and this time I lost my beard due to that.
En el barrio La Cachimba se ha formado la corredera. En el barrio La Cachimba se ha formado.
The next day, we had booked a taxi colectivo to take us up to Cayohuitas. Maybe I pronounced that incorrectly, but it's a pristine beach located on the northern coast of Cuba. And basically, we just needed a day where we could relax and get into the water.
Ay, mamá, ¿qué pasó? En el barrio La Cachimba se ha formado la corredera. En el barrio La Cachimba se ha formado la corredera.
After 3 nights in Vinales, we had another car taking us all the way from Vinales and way more east over to the town of Trinidad. It was a long 8-hour drive, and despite that, we almost only reached the center point of Cuba. And when driving on the highways, we simply just kept being surprised by the low amount of traffic compared to where we come from and I guess many other places. We arrived in Trinidad in the late afternoon. We quickly found another rooftop and got another pina colada, just so we can compare across towns, obviously for scientific reasons. Later in the evening, there was a show on the central square. The next day, we obviously decided to take another walking tour. This was really great also to get some more cultural understanding of Trinidad, and once again we had to go into the La Burguita del Medio, which is basically this franchise of bars, but it's also the bar that originally invented the mojito. So of course, naturally, we had to test it out.
Por ahí viene Leade, en tremenda corredera, viene a observar el cuarto de Tula que ha cogido candela. Le cogió candela, se quedó dormida y no apagó la vela.
Carlos y Marco están mirando este fuego, si ahora no se apaga luego Candela.
In the evening, we decided to hike up the nearby mountain, just to get sunset views over the town, and probably also to later reward ourselves with another pina colada.
Que vengan para acá rápido que la Tula mira cogió candela. Le cogió candela, se quedó dormida y no apagó la vela. Marco coge pronto el cubito y no te quedes allá afuera. Llénalo de agua y ven a apagar el cuarto.
On the next day, we booked a guided tour through the Valle de los Indios. This is a valley where many sugar plantations used to be. So we visited these different haciendas where the sugar plantations were, and we could see also how the slaves had worked and lived, and also where the, you can say, rich owners, the white owners of the plantations, how they used to live. Usually they would have these lookout towers in the plantations, so they could observe all the operations going on at the plot. In the afternoon, when we came back from the tour, we decided actually last minute to rent a few bikes and then bike out to the Havana waterfall, which was a few kilometers from the city. Back in town, we found, of course, another rooftop where we could have pina coladas and mojitos before finding a restaurant with live music. After that, we went to a bar, also because they have live music. It's simply just the vibe that we were chasing, and there's a lot of places in Trinidad where you can get that. The following day, we had another car drive up to the northern coast again, up to Varadero. I think you can call this area like the hotel zone, a tourist zone if you will. So there's a lot of all-inclusive hotels, some of them nicer than the others. Usually we're not the all-inclusive kind of people, but we also wanted some days just to relax at the beach and let everything soak in. We spent the days making the best of it, went out on a small boat just to experience the really blue water that they had. It was amazing. And we of course also had to take the tour bus through the town just to experience it and just to see other parts of the town to see what that had to offer. It was great, but then again we wouldn't really recommend Varadero to a lot of people, I think, if they want to experience the real Cuba. We think you could easily have a great time in other parts of Cuba. On the final night though in Varadero, we also found the Burguita del Medio, so luckily we can get some decent drinks. After Varadero, it was finally time to head back to Havana, and we had one full day left before catching our flight back to Canada. So we decided just to revisit some of the areas that we were really keen on, and maybe also take a few photos that I hadn't had the chance to take when we previously visited. We also just wanted to soak out all the vibes of the different bars, so we decided to go for some live music and again the final drinks. Early on the following morning, a car picked us up and took us out to Havana airport. From there, we flew back to Toronto, but because we had 8 hours of layover, we decided to make the most out of it. To do that, we actually rented a car using the app Tula, which we had used previously in Hawaii. There you can rent cars from private people, and this guy even showed up to the airport with the car. So we decided to make a day trip down to Niagara Falls on the Canadian side. That was easily done in the amount of time that we had. and honestly it was a perfect way of killing the time that we would otherwise have spent in an airport. After experiencing that Canadian winter, we were finally ready to go back to the Danish winter as well. Alright, after 5 months since I started the editing, the video is now complete. Next up will be the video from Morocco, which is approximately also 1.5 years late. So everything is going well. See you in the next one.